My name is Justin, and I am a son of God and an addict, and the host of the RECO12 speaker meeting. And thanks to my God, the steps, and the fellowship of other addicts, I am sober one day at a time since June 19th, 2015. And for that, I am beyond grateful. Welcome to RECO12. We are an organization whose addictions include alcohol, drugs, lust, and sex, food, and gambling, just to name a few. We come together from all places, faiths, and backgrounds to learn the similarities of addiction and to gain tools and hope from others who are walking a similar path. We invite recovering addicts with at least 1 year sobriety and who are actively working their recovery in their respective fellowships to share their experience, strength, and hope on a live Zoom webinar each Friday at noon Central Time for 20 to 25 minutes. Then we, the live audience, get the opportunity to ask questions of that speaker for another 20 to 25 minutes. If you're hearing this meeting in recorded podcast form and would like to participate as a live audience member sometime in the future, please go to RECO12.com, that's RECO12.com, to learn more and to submit your email address there to receive weekly invitations. RECO12 is a self-supporting service, and we appreciate your help in keeping us working our 12th step in this manner. We gratefully accept contributions. If you choose to contribute, you can go to RECO12.com/support, or you can click the link to PayPal that will be here in the live meeting and also in the show notes of the podcast. When you contribute, please make sure you let us know which meeting you listened to that inspired you to contribute. And today's meeting is meeting number 79. We look forward each week to receiving from the light reflected from our speakers. That light inspires hope, meaning, worth, and growth in us, the listening audience. Now let's introduce our guest speaker for today, Leonie T, whose topic is a new way of living. And just like last week, we're going to New Zealand for our guest speaker today, and I'm really excited about that. So here's a little bit about Leonie. She joined Alcoholics Anonymous and a 12-step food fellowship in August of 1980. Sobriety commenced for her in November of that year, and she lives in Christchurch, New Zealand. Leonie, the floor is yours. Take it away.
My name is Leonie, and I am an alcoholic. I'm also an addictive eater. I'll just start by just reading what sobriety is, so far as addictive eaters is concerned. Sobriety in AEA is freedom from addictive eating and all mind-altering substances. As a result of sobriety, AEA members have found recovery from binge eating, anorexia, bulimia, other forms of addictive eating, and compulsive exercise. Through sobriety, members find peace of mind and the ability to live a meaningful and productive life. As Justin mentioned, I came into a food 12-step fellowship in August 1980. I was 37 years old. I was married and had 4 children. My problems with eating in particular started with very early memories when I was 5 years old. Sneaking food behind my mother's back. And at that time, I would feel very, very guilty. That progressed as a young child in my preteens to becoming very aware that I thought I was overweight. Someone called me fat, and I asked my mother if I was fat, and she said, "No, Leonie, you are just right." Now, I did not like that response from her, so I would have been about 9 or 10, and I made up my mind that I was going to diet. And I dieted mostly in secret for the next almost 3 decades. I became aware by the time I had was about 12 or 13, of this obsession and this craving in my mind that I wanted to eat all the time. It wasn't anything to do with being hungry. It was just I wanted to eat, and the craving was always there. But the focus for me was on being thin and losing weight. I started going out with my husband, whom I'm still with today, when I was 14, and he was 16. And we played a lot of tennis together, almost daily. And we were both reasonably okay at tennis. I loved it. And there was a lot of activity in trying to lose weight. It wasn't really ever about being fit. I went through school, primary school, secondary school, very easily. Schoolwork came easily to me. And if I was good at something, I had to be the best. And if I wasn't the best, I wouldn't do it. And that was as simple as that. I was a very all or nothing person. I projected the image of trying to be perfect, which carried through my addictive years. Top of the class, best at this, best at that. And that's a high bar. And of course, I never reached it a lot of the time. When I was 21, my husband asked me to marry him. Now, I found this pretty amazing because I hated myself, within. I really did not like myself at all. And I was very surprised that anyone would want to marry me. So, of course, I said yes. Now, I was 21 at the time, and I thought, well, when I get married, and we were getting married in exactly 12 months, when I get married, I'm going to be 9 stone. Now, I'm not sure how heavy that is in American pounds, but I'd say it's probably about 125, 130 pounds. I'm not sure. But it was very thin. I'm tall. And it was, a very lightweight for someone of my height. But, I couldn't see that because I'm obsessed with how I look and my weight and my hair and all total self-obsession. But the day I got married, I was 9 stone. And I thought to myself, thank God, now I can eat. And basically the stops went off. And I was away with my husband for a week on our honeymoon. And I came back and I was 10 stone. And so I had put on 14 pounds, whatever, in 1 week. So I had eaten quite a lot. And I can't remember any binging in that time. My pattern was I was a binger or I was a starver. I used to try and make myself vomit. I was never successful. And this is way back in the 1980s. And, there was no such thing mentioned in those days of eating disorders. I read about alcoholism because I was always searching for this magic diet. But I had a secret life. And my secret life was the eating. Along with that was the spiritual hunger. I had always wanted to connect with God or a higher power. In all my life, I could only remember that. And I was very ashamed of it. I went to Sunday school, I went to Bible class, I went to church, and I didn't come from a practicing Christian family, but I took myself along to these places, every week. And I used to sit there and I'd look around and there would be some overweight people And I would think to myself, they're a pack of hypocrites. That's what I would think. I was very judgmental. And to me, God or a higher power was out there in Ireland, dealing with the troubles in Ireland, or in the United States, which is a long way away from New Zealand, or in outer space. There was just never, ever any connection. And I read religious books, I read Christian books, I read self-help books, but that spiritual hunger was very much a secret, just like my eating. So I was a sad case, really. And life in those years of my early marriage was pretty grim. I was very moody, depending on whether I'd had a binge that day. My binges were huge. I would eat absolutely everything I could. I put myself to bed because I couldn't stand up because I was so ill. And I would cry. I would feel sorry for myself. I would pray. And I would sleep it off. And then I'd get up and I'd start eating again because, an apple might make me feel better. So I was a bit of a mess, but it was the best I could do at the time. In the meantime, I'm projecting this perfect image, perfect wife, perfect mother, perfect. I played squash at this stage, representative squash player, representative tennis player, just an awful, awful existence. I could identify very much with drug addicts. Many years ago, drug addicts I used to read about drug addicts breaking into chemist shops or pharmacies to get drugs and how they would attack the pharmacist if he tried to stop the person getting the drugs. And that I identified with. I knew that I would kill for the food. When I had the obsession or the craving, it was so overwhelming, I would have knocked you down to get it. And that's a horrible existence. So I had read about Alcoholics Anonymous. I had read the 12 steps before I came into the program, and I thought they were wonderful until I got down to the 4th step and the 5th step, where it talked about a moral inventory. And I thought, well, there's no way I'm telling anyone about my eating, about my stealing, about my lying. So basically, I tried to work those steps in my life, but I couldn't because I couldn't get past the 4th and the 5th steps. However, I got worse, of course. In the meantime, I ran a slimming club. I started the slimming club here in Christchurch, Dunedin in New Zealand, where I was actually born. 25 people would come to our house every week with the blessing of my dear husband, and I would tell them all how to lose weight. But I could never tell anyone what I did because I thought I was the only person in the world that did what I did. And I really thought that when I died, I was going to hell because I was such a bad, terrible person. So I joined, what did I join? I joined several slimming clubs. I joined Weight Watchers 4 times. I became a Weight Watchers lecturer at one stage and stood up in front of everyone and told them how to lose weight, but I never ever told anyone what I did. I just tried harder. But as the years were going by, the craving to eat was getting worse, and the time between the binges for me was getting shorter and shorter. I would wake up in the morning with the obsession. I would go to bed at night with the obsession. And if I'd had a binge in the meantime, I would have to go to bed very early to sleep it off. I knew I was getting drunk on the food. I was still a lecturer at Weight Watchers, when I first connected with the 12-step fellowship for food addiction. And I had known about it for a couple of years, but there was no way I was going there because, after all, that is for weak, gutless people, as far as I was concerned. And here was I, a lecturer at Weight Watchers. So I had a lot of judgments. Eventually, when I couldn't stick to the food program I was following, I thought, I'm going to have to go and look at this damn food fellowship 12-step program, the last place I wanted to be. But in my heart of hearts, I knew I was the same as an alcoholic and a drug addict with the food. So I resigned from Weight Watchers because I couldn't take their money and go somewhere else as well. That was just too dishonest for me. So I took myself along to this meeting. And I was absolutely amazed. There were a dozen people there, some men, some women, and they were talking about their eating. And they were talking about the things I did. And I realized there were other people like me. But very fortunately for me, there was one person there who was in recovery. She was an alcoholic. She was a drug addict. She was an addictive eater. And she talked about having a disease, an illness. And at the time, I thought, well, that's a cop-out. I haven't got a disease. I'm a bad, terrible person, and I'm weak and immoral. But what she did have was very attractive to me. She was slim, she was young, and she had no guilt. She had no shame. And that really was what was very attractive. I couldn't understand how she couldn't feel guilty about eating out of public rubbish tins, how she slept with men to get food, to get money, to get alcohol and drugs. I couldn't understand how she could feel free. And she talked about God and a higher power. And she had been an atheist. And as it turns out, she'd only been sober for 1 year, but there was something about her. So I rang her up the next night and I said, what do I do? And I said, will you help me? And she jumped right back at me and said, no one helped me. And I felt very knocked back, but she talked a lot and I listened and I loved listening to her. And eventually I got brave enough and I said again, will you help me? Will you sponsor me? And she said, yes, Leonie, I will help you. So that was in the August of 1980. And she told me about how she had got sober and stopped eating. And she said that for her, and I understood this, she had to give up the food exactly the same way as she gave up the alcohol and the drugs. She had to give up the food. And she said for her, addiction swapped from one thing to another to another. And she had given up the alcohol and the drugs for 2 years. That's my recollection. And after about a year, she had found, she had this huge problem with food. And so she had started a 12-step fellowship for food addiction. And from that day, and I came in a year later, she hadn't had to pick up the first one. So when she talked to me about having to give up the food, alcohol and drugs, and talked to me about addiction swapping, I got that. I understood that. I felt the pain in my heart because that felt so painful to me, having to let go, particularly of prescription pills and the food. Oh my God, how am I going to do this? But I was prepared to do it. So my sobriety, as I saw it at that time, meant not picking up a drink, not picking up any pills, any drugs, of which I was very scared. I was very scared of marijuana because that was really the hippie time. And because I knew I'd love it. And I didn't drink a lot of alcohol because it wasn't in our home. You know, I wasn't brought up with alcohol. But I knew that it was a problem for me. So I stayed away from it. So my main addiction just focused on food. So I started off, and she gave me a nutritional food plan that I had to commit to her each day, and I had to be absolutely rigorously honest. And she said, and you will not be able to do it, Leonie. You will have to find a higher power to enable you to do this. So I started out praying to God, please keep me sober and clean today. And I sailed along for about a month. Everything was wonderful. The sack of coal had gone off my back, and I'd found it. And I couldn't believe it. It was like a new life until one day I thought to myself, one won't hurt. Don't need to tell my sponsor. I'll just have one and then I'll stop. So I picked up the first one. I don't know what it was. It was a piece of something. Might have been an apple. But then the click went in my mind. Down the switch went. And of course I couldn't stop. And I didn't stop. 2 months later, I'm still whining and complaining and crying to my sponsor. I'm going to 2 meetings a day. I'm crying through meetings because I can't stop. And I can remember in the November of that year, waking up in the morning, a little bit earlier than this, because we're early here in the morning, praying to God, please God, don't let me pick up the first one today. And I was straight down to the kitchen. I was down on my knees. I was in front of the cake tins, and I was eating. And there, at that moment, I gave up hope. In my heart, I just knew it didn't matter what I did. I was never going to be able to stop. I was never going to be able to get sober. And I prayed what I prayed many times. Please, God, don't let me pick up the next one for the next hour. And that was November 1980. And this is, it's December 2021. And I have not had to pick up the first one since that day. Now, that first day, that first week, that first few weeks, those months, the first 2 or 3 years, I still had the obsession to eat. I struggled, but getting my head on the pillow at the end of the day was the most important thing without picking up the first one. After 6 weeks in the December of 1980, we went on holiday, which was a long way from Christchurch, with my husband and children, and no food fellowship meetings, but AA. And I knew I was going to the 4 meetings a week when I was on holiday. But, the time happened. I was in the house on my own. My husband had gone out with the children. I want to eat. What am I going to do? I was absolutely shaking. I was terrified. I had the obsession. And in those days, there were no cell phones. There was only toll calls, and it was very, very expensive to make a toll call. Very expensive. And I had no money. I didn't work. I looked after 4 children. I thought, oh my God, I'm going to have to tell my husband. I'm going to have to make these toll calls. I picked up the phone. I rang my sponsor. I was shaking, and she talked to me, and she talked to me, and she talked to me. And I got off the phone. I went down to the bedroom. I was down on my knees. I was praying. I did not have to eat. A few weeks later, it happened again. A year later, we went to that same place for Christmas, and I decided I was going to start a 12-step meeting in the 2 weeks that we were there on holiday. So I put a notice in the paper, and I started a meeting, and I 12-step people. And that meeting went for about 18 months, and then it died because no one actually got sober. But I didn't have to pick up the first one. And I very much relate to Bill Wilson and his story and coming to the end of the line for him. And he had a spiritual experience right at that particular moment. But mine was slow. And it was 2 or 3 years before I realised that the obsession to eat, drink, or take a pill had gone. But in the meantime, I had gone to one meeting a day, sometimes 2. I had tried to carry the message to anyone that would listen to me. I never saved a soul, but by golly, I was out there trying to save them. We started 2 more meetings here in Christchurch. I went to AA, I listened, I learned, and I did a 4th step about the same time as God gave me sobriety, within a few days, just like Bill Wilson, who sat at the table and shared his shortcomings, as it says, with Ebby. I did my 5th step with another human being and shared the lot. You know, the resentment, the anger, the shame, the guilt, the lying, the stealing. And those first 5 steps in particular were the key for me. I had to do them all. I had to accept I was powerless, that I had this disease, and that my life needed to be, and it has been ever since, carrying the message. And it's the most important thing in my life. It actually is more important than my husband and my family. And if I don't have sobriety, I would not have them. I'm very grateful to be here and to be able to have shared with you, which is a lot about what it was like. But today, I'm very clear. I've had 2 lives. I had 37 years of hopelessness and despair, and that sums it up. And I've had this life ever since that continues to get better. Meditation is a big part of my recovery and my journey. And I'm here today. And if you've got anything you would like to ask me, Justin, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you so much, Leonie. That was a great story, a great experience that you shared about how things were and what happened and everything. And I've written down several questions, and there's been a few come in from the live audience. And a reminder to our live audience, if you have questions for Leonie, type them in the Q&A link at the bottom of your window, and I'll get to those and relay those to Leonie as they come up. First question that I have for you, Leonie, is one that came in from Bill from our live audience. And he's asking kind of a clarifying question. He says, did you say you're a member of AEA? And then are you willing or able to share a little bit of the differences between AEA and OA?
I think AEA focuses on sobriety in the way that I mentioned, which is freedom from addictive eating, which for me meant giving up the food, and all mind-altering substances, which for me meant the alcohol and the drugs and the prescription drugs. Very disciplined way of life. It means for me that I don't eat what I feel like eating. I have learned that I love eating on a food plan. It is tremendous freedom for me and to me. I have a very disciplined way of eating. I do not want all the Christmas stuff, the chocolate and the whatever, and that is the freedom from the craving and the freedom from the obsession. I don't want it. That is the amazing thing that, my higher power has done for me. I don't want it, which is a huge change from trying to keep myself out of it when I loved it. All that high cream stuff, that junk food, but ordinary food too, and stuff I didn't like. I ate stuff I hated. I just had to eat.
Thank you for sharing that, Leonie. I appreciate it. One of the questions I have that so hard for me to grasp, and I hope you can help clarify this just a little bit. So you mentioned you haven't had to pick up the first one since 1980, and also you talked about that I have to give up food just like I have to give up alcohol and drugs. Now, to me, Leonie, it sounds like one cannot eat anything at all, and I know that's not true. But please help me understand what it means. I have to fuel my body with food. What does that mean to not pick up the first one, or that I have to treat food like I do alcohol and drugs? If I have to fuel my body somehow, I have to eat something. What does that mean to not pick up the first one?
For me, that meant and means being willing to follow a nutritional food plan, which was suggested to me by my sponsor. My food plan has changed a lot over the years as I've got older. But it would be exactly the same. It was actually very similar to the Weight Watchers food program. It had protein and carbohydrate, not refined carbohydrate, but, complex carbohydrate, fruit and vegetables, dairy, pulses, all those things. But for me, I needed to weigh it and measure it. I had measured amounts because I never knew how much was enough, because I always wanted more, or I wouldn't eat at all. It was easier for me to starve, because when I picked up the first one, the light switch would go on in my head, and I just lay the food out on the bench and just work my way through it in secret.
Thank you. I think that clarifies it a little bit for me, and hopefully for others. Another question that came in from Bill from our live audience. He says, and thanks for being here, Bill, and for asking these questions. He asks, why do you think your spiritual hunger had to remain a secret for you?
I thought it was weak. That I was searching for this God. Now, I realized in early times, very early, that I could have either the food, alcohol and drugs, or I could have God. I'm only talking about myself. I couldn't have both. And when, by the grace of God, I was able to put down those substances and those behaviours, God, the blockage between me and my higher power dissolved. For me today, I don't have a religious God. God for me is in my heart. It is within. It's definitely within my heart. It wasn't like that at the beginning. It was, how the big book tells us how more will be revealed. And that has been an evolving experience. And I'm not scared of dying today. I thought I was going to hell. I don't feel like that today. I don't feel I'm a bad, terrible person. I make mistakes. Of course I make mistakes. I say things that I regret. I'm straight up. I say what I think, which isn't always well received. I try to be diplomatic, but my personality is such that sometimes it doesn't come across as kind as it might be. But, you know, my heart is I want to help. If I can help, I will share my experience with anyone who wants help. But I don't pussyfoot around. If someone wants to lie to me, well, that's on them. If they want to pull the wool over my eyes, well, sometimes I can be quite naive because I think everyone is as desperate as I was, and I find that they're not. But there are also some people who I would see as stayers, who have been clean and sober for decades, and, you know, who have abandoned themselves totally to this program and try and live this spiritual way of life as it's set out in the big book. And that's what I identify with.
Yeah, thank you for that, Leonie. Kind of along that same line, can you describe how you have in the past made food or your eating or anything or anyone else your higher power, and how that has created that blockage?
Well, in the past, it was just the disease. As far as I'm concerned, that was addiction, that I was a person who was prone to addiction. I believe that. Possibly genetically prone. I have this disease. I have an uncle who's dead now, who died of alcoholism. I look at two of my grandparents who could well have had this disease. My father definitely did not. Spiritual sickness, definitely spiritual sickness. But I've got it, and I'm grateful. I'm very grateful that my path has been what it has been. I mean, I would never have thought that one day that I would look back and be very grateful for all those years of hopelessness and despair, because I had to have that to be the person I am today and to be free of it and to have an experience to share with other people. I can really only help someone who is as desperate as I was. If someone is not really, really ill with this disease, I'm not the right person. I really am not the right person to help them. I'm a Bill Wilson, a Dr. Bob person. I was at the end of the road. I would wake up wanting to be dead for many, many years. It's not like that today.
Very nice. Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. You mentioned toward the end of your share that meditation is a big part of your recovery life, of your life, day-to-day life today. What does that look like to you? What does your meditation, your conscious contact with your higher power look like to you?
Well, I still continue to read a lot of spiritual books. I've always been a reader. I've read a lot of Buddhist books, Zen books, Christian books. You know, I'm pretty open-minded these days, as opposed to being totally closed-minded in the disease. Meditation for me is formal meditation. I go to a formal meditation AA meeting in another hour and a quarter every week. I meditate myself, but it's mainly now, right this moment, I am connected with God. But I'm still a human being, and I trust that God is giving me the words to speak to you. It's a feeling. I can't describe it, but the blockage isn't there. The blockage that used to be there is not there any longer. It is spirit. I think it is there all the time. I feel it is there all the time. Sometimes I can get excited and forget about the inner being, but it is there all the time. And the formal meditation and the meditation I do myself each day, the prayers, the big book, our literature, the sharing with others, all enhances that connection with God for me. I think that spirit is everlasting. I don't think it dies. I believe it doesn't die. I believe it was there before we're born. I believe it is there when we die. And the same for me and for you. That's what I believe today. I don't believe in that judgmental God that I believed in before I got here.
Oh, I appreciate that. That's really good, and I love the love and compassion that you share about, and the everlastingness of the God of your understanding, your higher power at this point. A reminder to our live audience: if you have any more questions for Leonie, please type them in the Q&A link there at the bottom of your Zoom window. We'll get to those. I have a couple of more questions here that I have before we start the wrapping up process. So, Leonie, you mentioned that, well, how do you work your 12th step today? How do you give back? What does that look like to you?
I don't pick out the first one. I go to 4 meetings a week at this stage. I'm available on the telephone. I will 12-step people if asked. As our fellowship has grown, the opportunities to do 12-step work, to basically get off my bottom and go out of my way to go and try and carry the message, that was a huge part of the first, until probably the last 5 years ago, when as more people became sober, those 12-step jobs had to be shared out. I'm happy to share my experience with anyone. It used to be any time, 24 hours a day. But as I got into my 70s, it got a bit tough waking up in the middle of the night trying to help someone. So I don't take those middle of the night calls any longer. And I have found that it is more effective for me to be available for several hours a day, which I do, and I stay at home and I take phone calls, or I meet with people, not in those hours. I'm happy if anyone wants to come and talk to me, or I'll go and talk to anyone at any time, just not the middle of the night anymore.
Thank you for that. And a follow-up to that, when you or someone else that you are 12-stepping or talking to who's reaching out to you is just drowning in the obsession, the desperation of a drowning man, how do you surrender that? And how do you try and share with them how to surrender that obsession before it triggers the allergy and we're off and running again?
Well, Justin, I've tried to tell people how to do it. It's never worked. I haven't saved anyone yet, but I have shared my own experience, particularly those early 2 or 3 years, which for me was going to any lengths. You know, when God first stopped me eating, drinking, and drugging, there were 2 things I was prepared to do. I was terrified of it, but I was prepared to do it. I was prepared, 1, to leave my husband and 4 children if it meant sobriety. And 2, I was prepared to go to India as a missionary. Now, they sound pretty weird and way out things, but I kept waiting in those early years for God to let me know that I had to do one of those things. Now, I'm still waiting, and I certainly did not want to go to India as a missionary, and I still do not want to, but if the call came, I guess I would be given the grace to do it. But, you know, my thinking was pretty unwell back in those times, but I was prepared to do those things. So I can only share that.
So basically, it's the willingness to do whatever it takes to stay sober, even if that means, like you said, leaving your family and going off to a foreign country to serve as a missionary. And I remember someone else sharing something similar to that with me, and I think he's actually here in the audience. But about he got to the point where it was either go and drink myself to oblivion, or go to an ashram in India and live out my days there. And the response that he got from a voice inside said, well, if those are your only 2 options, you've got a big problem with yourself. Now, what are you going to do about it? So very, very, very interesting. Thank you for sharing that, Leonie. Before we get to my last question, I'm just checking one more time, make sure there's no questions from the live audience that have come in. Nope. Okay. So Leonie, do you have any final words of wisdom for us before we start closing this meeting down? Well,
I think what I've shared has sounded pretty grim to my ears. I hope it hasn't sounded grim to yours. I would say to anyone, there is a solution. There is a solution. For me, it's been absolutely connected with surrender, with honesty and the open-mindedness and the willingness. I have needed all those things. And if you're desperate, there is a solution.
Thank you so much, Leonie. That really was. It was not a grim meeting. It was a great RECO12 weekly speaker meeting for all addicts and those wanting to learn more about addiction and the recovery therefrom. If we didn't get to your questions, or if you have other questions, please go to RECO12.com/forum and join in our community there and ask those questions and answer others' questions that may come up. I invite the audience to come back next week. And if you haven't yet rated and reviewed this podcast in Apple Podcasts, please go do so now. It helps us work our 12th step in sharing this message with others and getting it out there to more people. Next week, we will be hearing from David G. from Oklahoma, also whose topic will be brought to where we stood. And I'm really looking forward to that one too. All right, now, before we head out, let's launch off into the rest of our day with a prayer of Leonie's choosing. Leonie, go ahead and close us out with that.
Well, 2 prayers, actually. The prayer that I say at the end of the day is, thank you, God, for sobriety. And I'll just close with the serenity prayer. God, grant us the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, the courage to change the things we can, and the wisdom to know the difference.
Amen. Thank you so much, Leonie. Keep coming back, everybody. It works when I work it, so work it. You are worth it.
this life of mine. Peaks too high to conquer, streams too wide to cross, troughs too deep to walk through without incurring loss. Yet here I am, still standing tall, despite the rough terrain. One like me survived the storms and walked through wind and rain. Still standing, I will fight the good fight. Still searching for glimmers of light. Feet still on the ground, I can still be found. Standing still.
My wings are torn and tattered, but I know I still